Well, I have a lot of comments, and I promise it'll lead to a question. First thing, to go to the idea of like the younger generation, talking about like getting goosebumps. I guess it was 8 years ago now. This had to do with something when I played football in college. There's like this networking event that I go to a lot of times. I haven't been in a couple years, but it's at Stanford University, and they always have pretty good speakers or pretty like high level speakers. And it was actually the first year I went was 2017. And I remember the CEO of Intuit was there. Now, Intuit is the TurboTax, QuickBooks. They're a tax software company. And I remember during the Q&A, someone asked them, what are you studying way off into the future for your company to help provide value? And it was the weirdest answer given the context of the speech. He said, we're actually studying the development of children's under 12 brains because their interaction with technology is developing the organs in the brain differently than you and I have today. And I always thought it was so weird that the CEO of a tax company said that their priority in the future was studying children's brains because the interface with technology developed the brain differently. Fast forward to Harrison's book, and I forget who says it, but there was a part where it was talking about the split off of Homo sapiens versus Homo alienus, I think was the phrase of basically like this kind of paving forward of a new species and colonization of our race. And I think if we look at AI in the sense that we're describing it today, because I think you can kind of look at it through two lenses, but the sense that's the negative one, it's a colonization mechanism to, as the Grok exchange that Laura, my jaw was on the floor, by the way, Laura, when I was reading that, because I was like, what is happening is like we're seeing that AI is the weaponization of our data back against us to enslave us and then make us more pliable for a physical invasion or a psychological invasion or a combination of both, to where humans now are actually transformed. And then I think back to when I heard that guy say that like we're witnessing the genetic engineering, I think, of the human species to not have, call it a connection with spirit or a connection with source, God / consciousness that humans have typically had, to where now if you go down that STS path, you have that. So that kind of leads me to the question is, I think, well, let me say this. I think in AI, the sense that like, and one way you could look at it is probably back in 2005, a lot of people would have looked at Google and be like, this is the worst thing for humanity, to have the internet and to have these tools to be able to do things that we never had before because you weren't going to the library and actually using your brain to get information. Now, what we've seen is like for 85% of people, I think that's true, but maybe for 10 to 15% of people, it actually helped us get smarter because now we can aggregate information faster in a way that helps us kind of see things and then put our hypothesis to the test and say like, okay, that makes sense or that doesn't. Like Laura is doing is she knows way more about this stuff than Grok does. And so she's seeing the feedback that it gets and saying like, okay, I have discernment now about it. So I think we're probably going in a direction where like most people will outsource their thinking, creativity, and everything to that. But I think the good side of it is with technology, we do have a better way to aggregate and sort through data to use it for people that are discerning, thinking individuals to be able to kind of weed through things and see it and do it in a way that is more or less like a glorified search engine that kind of helps us sort through information. But my question is, the same way that we use technology to colonize second density, which would be through animals or plants or whatever. I mean, we've been in human history is more or less like the colonization of second density, land, resources, all those things. Is AI the fourth density version of the technology we've used for thousands of years to colonize second density that is now colonizing us as we're moving into this phase? I don't know, but I think, I've always go back to when Laura taught about like understanding second density to third density. It kind of helps us, even though it's logarithmic, it kind of helps us understand fourth density to us. Is it more or less like a colonization tool that is changing us for the harvest, I guess, if that makes sense?
I think it's us becoming more aware of the instrument that has been being used on us all this time for thousands of years. AI is kind of like a hyperdimensional control system made manifest. And I think that we are probably in the process already of transitioning to fourth density, one way or the other, that, we're at an early stage or maybe an early intermediate stage. And the ways and means that they're doing these things are becoming more apparent to us. How to deal with it is, like Harrison said, there's going to be a split. And of course, he attributed that back to Chris Langan. But I think it's true. And there's going to be a split. And there's one thing that I don't think AI takes into consideration, because, in this spiel I got out of Grok the other day that we were talking about, it talks about, keeping the livestock, the human livestock, viable. You don't push them too far this way, too far that way. You don't let them find out. You suppress information. You create divisive elements, wars. All kinds of things to induce suffering. But it also says that you limit that the system would want to limit catastrophic outcomes, because they don't want to lose their population of loosh generators. That's a term that they've come up with for what aliens like to consume. They like for humans to suffer, because somehow this energy of suffering is food for them.
By the way, where did loosh come from? Is that for?
Didn't that
Robert Monroe?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so but if the system is set to not result in catastrophic outcomes, except that they're controlled and any kind of like they'll obviously have world wars, because that is an enormous amount of suffering. But in terms of the total population, you're talking, like, for example, 60 some million people died in World War II. 60, not the 6 million Jews, the other what is it, 54 million that died that nobody ever talks about. But and in terms of the total global population, there was still a lot of people left. But they don't account for the possibility of cosmic cataclysm. And that was something that Grok didn't even mention. And yet, in my research, that is something that has repeatedly brought entire civilizations down to the level of the Stone Age, and made the availability of loosh pretty rare. It's a pretty rare commodity. So 95% population reduction at the end of the Roman Empire, according to one book, in a specific area. And the Black Death, 75% of the population in many areas. Some areas were almost untouched, and it varied, but in the worst cases, it was like 75% of the population. If you think about that today, 75% of any given population, what is 75% of 350 million? It's a lot of dead bodies. And it's also an enormous reduction in the amount of negative energy that can be, fed off of from a population. So I don't think everything is entirely cut and dried. And the seas did tell us that at some point, before everything goes completely pear-shaped, that somehow the playing field will be leveled. And if we have a level playing field, then we have some possibility of determining our future according to our own lights, rather than being encapsulated in little pods so that the system can feed off of us.